We are back again with On the Money Line, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're here for the second time this week for the triple header at UFC Fight Island on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi. This episode will be the second installment of the Fight Island triple header, and this time it's Michael Chiesa versus Neil Magny, which I think is a really good fight stylistically. Of course, we should have had Leon Edwards versus Khamzat Chimaev, but unfortunately Khamzat withdrew due to COVID-19 related issues, and that fight has actually been rebooked for the March 13th headliner. Let's not forget that Leon had to pull out when it was originally scheduled back in December because of COVID too, so hopefully the third time is a charm with that fight because it simply has to happen. As I mentioned in the last episode of the podcast, this event will also start early too, which is great for us in the UK and Europe. The prelims will start at 2 PM UK time, which means a 9 AM start Eastern time. Obviously these times are subject to change, so again, don't come at me between now and Saturday if the times have changed. But just before we get into the breakdowns, a couple of things to reiterate from the last episode of the podcast in regards to MMAPlay365. We have restructured our pricing for 2021. We are now providing free content for every single UFC event, as our Dog of the Week will be free to anybody that wants to grab it. A next event subscription is now only $4.99. Our monthly subscription is just $9.99, and our yearly price is a nuts $99.99. For a handicapper, myself, that has now won 4 years in a row tracked and verified online, you'll do well to beat these prices. We'll be giving you written breakdowns, recommended bets, official bets, parlays, parlay pieces, and a winning handicapper on your side. Even heading into 2021, I've only lost one event in the last 15, which dates back to September. The form is solid, and I look to roll into 2021 how I left 2020. To sign up, please go and visit MMAPlay365.com today. And let's go, let's break down some fights. In the main event, we've got Michael Chiesa versus Neil Magny. Neil Magny is currently the minus 130 favourite. The comeback on Chiesa at plus 110 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with Michael Chiesa at plus 110. In my opinion, it was quite surprising with Chiesa opening at around plus 150, but all that money has been coming back in on Chiesa down to plus 110. I agree with that line movement, and to be honest, I expected Chiesa to be a small favourite in this spot. As for where the betting lines move, I do think we're going to see some fluctuation. It appears that Neil Magny is quite popular on the betting line as well. Chiesa did drop down to plus 100, minus 105, and more money came back in on Magny, so I do actually expect that theme to continue. I think that Chiesa will go down to plus 100 again, and I do think more money will come in on Magny a little bit. Ultimately, come Wednesday, I think both fighters are going to step into the cage roughly where they're sitting right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, like I said in the introduction to this episode, I do think stylistically it's a really good fight. On the feet, I think that Neil Magny's got the advantage. I think he's the more efficient striker. He's going to have more volume. He's going to be the one, in my opinion, that is going to be trying to keep the distance. At least I think he should, from the stylistic perspective anyway. From a cardio perspective, with this now being 5 rounds, again, I think Neil Magny's got a cardio advantage. I don't think Chiesa's going to be completely washed come the championship round, should it get there. But I do think when you are looking at the cardio, Neil Magny's a cardio machine. We all know that. In regards to the grappling though, the wrestling, I think that's where Chiesa's strongest. I think if Chiesa can get Magny down, I think he'll be able to work on Magny. I think he's the better topside grappler. If it's Magny that actually takes Chiesa down, which Magny has been doing lately in his fights, I do trust Chiesa on his back. I definitely trust Chiesa on his back more than what I would trust Magny on his back. So it's really going to be interesting to see who gets the game plan going in this fight. For me, if I was Neil Magny, I'd be trying to stay at range. I'd be trying to pop the jab out, the straight shots, look to keep that distance at all times, and I think if he does that, then it could be quite a comfortable fight for him. But it's never going to be that simple, especially with Chiesa. Since Chiesa's moved up to welterweight, he is absolutely huge. How he ever made 155 pounds, I've got no idea. In fact, I actually saw an old picture of him weighing in at 155 pounds, and he looks like a completely different human being. So that move up for Chiesa's been great. He's been able to pack in that muscle mass. He's strong. He moves forward. He's aggressive. When he gets the body lock and pushes his opponent against the cage, like I say, he's really strong. He's really tricky to deal with, and ultimately is hard to get off you. And we saw that in the RDA fight. RDA had some real problems takedowns, getting away from Chiesa, stopping Chiesa, controlling that distance. And when Chiesa was getting RDA down, it's been a long time since I've seen RDA controlled like that on the mat. Normally his get-up game's really solid, really slick, and he can get back up to his feet more often than not. But against Chiesa, he was just struggling because of that top side heavy pressure that Chiesa has. And I think Magny will have the same issues if Chiesa takes him down. It's all well and good saying, you know, Magny should be keeping distance and popping away at him, but I just don't think it's going to be that simple. For a start, Magny's not going to have the height and the reach advantage that he normally has over his previous opponents. So he is going to have a height and reach advantage, but what I'm saying is it's going to be minimised. It's not going to be as great as what it usually is. For a start, there's only 2-inch difference in height between them, with Magny 6'3", Chiesa 6'1". But Chiesa, for me, is the bigger built fighter, is the stronger fighter. So the way Magny's been winning his previous fights as of late is he's been closing that distance, tying up in the clinch and dominating. But if he ties up with Chiesa, I think Chiesa will be able to reverse position against the cage. I think he'll be able to bully Magny in the clinch. And ultimately, I think that's where he takes him down. Magny hasn't got terrible takedown defense. He can defend takedowns, but Chiesa prevents a different takedown threat. So he won't always be looking for the double legs, the symbol legs, the traditional wrestling takedowns. He's going to be looking for that body lock. He's going to be looking to drag his opponent down, trip them down, or take the back. And like I say, that's where Chiesa's better in that grappling realm. Now, for me, I don't think that Magny's going to be able to keep and control that distance for a full 25 minutes. I think that Chiesa's going to be aggressive in this fight. I think he's going to be the one pushing forward. He was talking about how he's had multiple problems with his knees over his last few fights that have now been fixed. He had surgery, his back. So I do think that Chiesa's going to be able to fight more comfortably in this fight. But ultimately, I feel it's up to Chiesa here. It's dependent on Chiesa and how he fights, to if he wins or if he loses, because if he's not aggressive, if he doesn't try and put pressure on Magny, close the distance and get a hold of him, then I think Magny will be able to just pop away at him and he'll run away with the fight. For me, I think that Chiesa is going to be able to get the fight down to the mat. He might only need one takedown per round in order to get the control time he needs to win that round. And honestly, I really wouldn't rule out a submission on the mat either. Chiesa is that good. The bottom line here, in my opinion, is I feel if Chiesa gets a takedown in 3 rounds out of the 5, then he's going to win this fight, because like I say, I think that he'll win a round where a takedown is completed with top time, or there's the potential of a submission. But if it goes the distance, he'd need to get 3 takedowns in this fight in 3 different rounds, and I think that would be enough for Chiesa to win this fight. I do think that if this fight does go to a decision, it could be one of those fights that is very close on the scorecards, but Chiesa is very capable of winning a decision, and I feel that he's the fighter that's more likely to finish the fight if the fight is finished as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Michael Chiesa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Warlley Alves versus Mounir Lazzez. Lazzez is currently the -225 favourite. The comeback on Alves at +185 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think there's minimal value in Mounir Lazzez. It's absolutely nuts to me that the bookies open this at a -115 pick'em on either side. For me, I feel that that's just lazy from the bookie. I don't think the bookie knew which one to set the favourite. They didn't want to look into it, so they let the public decide, which the public decided pretty fast at -225. I know that's a long way off from the -115, but I do feel that there's still some value there. As for where the betting lines move, as you can imagine, it's all been one-way traffic here. It's all been money on Lazzez, pushing it from that -115 all the way to where it's sitting now at -225. I do think that more money will continue to come in on Lazzez. I think Lazzez will enter the cage on Wednesday at around -250. But as for how this fight plays out, I do think that stylistically it's a really good fight for Lazzez. I was a little bit unsure of Lazzez before his debut against Razak Al Hassan. I did think that Lazzez needed some developments, needed some improvements to be able to hang inside the UFC, but man, those improvements and developments were absolutely there, and then some in that debut. He looked phenomenal. He looked like a great striker. He looked like he was good at range, good inside boxing range. He was strong in the clinch. He used wrestling, which actually makes me think that Lazzez is more well-rounded than what people might think, because he was winning those striking exchanges against Alhassan. So he didn't really need to implement his wrestling, but he did. He mixed it up and it was a phenomenal performance. And I just think unless that performance is a once-in-a-lifetime career performance, if that's who he is as a fighter and we see that on Wednesday, then I think that Warlley Alves is going to be in for a very long night, or a short night, if you know what I mean. So I think stylistically it's a good fight for Lazzez. I've never really been too high on Warlley Alves, if I'm being honest, but he has had some good performances, so I can't knock him of that. In this fight though, I think if Alves stays standing with Lazzez, I think Lazzez is going to light him up on the feet. I think he's going to land combinations on him. Those straight shots down the barrel are just insane. They've come with power, they come with speed. And like I say, no matter what range Lazzez is fighting at, he's comfortable. Even for a tall, big-built guy, when he gets into boxing range, he'll still swing inside boxing range. He's durable, he's got a chin. Alhassan cracked him a couple of times. And we know how hard he hits. For me, Warlley Alves in this fight has got to try and take Lazzez down. But again, it's difficult to take down. Lazzez has got good fundamentals when defending takedowns, getting the underhooks, pushing their head down, using his strength to keep him vertical. And I think that if Alves enters the clinch against Lazzez and doesn't take him down, then Lazzez is going to be able to reverse the position on the cage, land short, hard strikes, and then exit out of the clinch, get the fight back at distance and start lighting Alves up again. If Alves does take him down, then Alves has got to get to work. I do think topside, that's where Alves' path to victory is in this fight, but for me, I don't think Lazzez is going to accept position on the mat. I think he's going to use his strength. He's going to explode back up to his feet before Alves has tried to even go to work on the mat or lock up a submission. And this is ultimately why I'm saying that Lazzez has got a really stylistically favourable matchup here. I think on the feet, he lights Alves up. I'd be very, very shocked to see Alves get the better of the striking exchanges, unless, like I said, that Alhassan fight was a once-in-a-lifetime performance, a once-in-a-career performance for Mounir Lazzez, but I just don't see that being the case. I do think he's the better fighter here. He could potentially have issues if Alves does start taking him down and getting that control time in. But that's another point to mention. Alves' cardio, his gas tank, it's always been a bit of a concern, a little bit of a red flag. I do think that Alves paces himself a little bit in his fight so he doesn't overexert, so he doesn't empty that gas tank. And if Mounir Lazzez is making Alves take him down constantly, if Alves is having to put in 3 or 4 takedowns and then working for each of those takedowns, and I think the gas tank's going to empty quite quickly. Ultimately, I think this fight is going to be a fight that's won and lost on the feet and maybe in the clinch scenarios as well. And for me, I do feel that Lazzez is so much better in those areas, in the striking, power, volume, cardio, being the aggressor, pushing forward, being more physical. I think Lazzez checks off every box, and for those reasons, I'm picking Mounir Lazzez to win this fight. And in the next fight, I absolutely love this fight. We've got Villanueva versus Vinicius Mejia. Villanueva is currently the -140 favourite to come back on Mejia at +120 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Mejia at +120. I do think it's quite an even fight. If it was a -110 pick 'em on either side, I think that would be much fairer. So for that reason, that's why I see the value on the underdog. And as for where the betting line moves, I do think we're going to see more money coming in on Villanueva. I don't think it's going to be a massive amount of money, but that's where the current trend is right now. And I do think that continues up until Wednesday. There might be a little bit of fluctuation as well. Ultimately, I think Villanueva's not going to come in too far off from where he is right about now. I think it may be -140 where it is now, or potentially -150. And as for how this fight plays out, like I've already said, I absolutely love this fight. It's a clear striker versus grappler type of fight. We've got Villanueva, who's 0-2 in the UFC. We've got Mejia, that's 0-3 in the UFC. So neither fighter has got a win in the UFC, and both of the fighters have been finished in all the losses in the UFC. So it makes for a really, really interesting fight. Villanueva, clearly the striker in this fight. He'll be the one that's going to be trying to close the distance, landing a hard bomb on Mejia. Mejia has some durability to an extent, but he allows himself to get pushed back to the cage, and you can unload on him, and all it takes is one big hard shot to put him down. and Villanueva possesses that type of power. And in the striking realm, I think you'll do well to find a fighter inside the UFC that has worse striking defense than Moreira. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the dude just seems so cagey. He seems stiff on the feet, no head movement, no fluidity, no real erratic movement, forwards, backwards, laterally. He's just a really easy fighter to beat on the feet if you're a UFC fighter. And for me, Villanueva is going to have success in landing on him. The thing is, for Moreira, if he can get a hold of Villanueva, he's a bigger fighter, a taller fighter. I think he's going to be a stronger fighter as well. And if he can get Villanueva down to the mat, then honestly there's a huge gap in skill on the mat. I think Moreira will be able to roll on Villanueva. I think he'll be able to get off on strikes. I think he'll be able to pass his guard, transition. I think he'll be hunting for submissions. So it really is a type of fight where whoever gets their game going, whoever is able to dominate early in this fight will be the one that wins the fight. For me, I feel that Moreira is going to have some advantages there, because although Villanueva's got the power to knock him out, I do think that Moreira has fought way better strikers than what Villanueva is. I think he's fought strikers that hit a lot harder as well. So in my opinion, although it is absolutely possible that Villanueva goes in there and sparks Moreira out, I think that Moreira's going to be able to weather any early storm. And like I said, it's got to be Villanueva that is coming into that boxing range to land on him. He can't sit on the outside and strike, because he's the shorter fighter, the smaller fighter. He's going to be the one that's closing the distance, and that plays in to the game of Moreira. That'll allow Moreira to try and get a hold of him and rag him down to the mat, which is ultimately what I think happens. If Villanueva can't knock Moreira out in those early striking exchanges, I do think Moreira, even if it's just a panic tie-up, I do think he'll be able to get a hold of Villanueva and get him down. So if this fight does hit the mat, which I do think it's going to, I do favour Moreira absolutely down there, and I do think he'd be able to find a submission. So for those reasons, I'm picking Vinicius Moreira to get his first win in the UFC and to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Roxanne Modafferi versus Viviane Araujo. Araujo is currently the minus 345 favourite. The comeback on Modafferi at plus 285 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, if I am going to pick a value side, it's got to be Modafferi at plus 285. The reason being, she has been trading wins and losses since a fight against Nico Montano back in 2017, but ultimately we've seen time and time again Modafferi winning these spots where she is a huge underdog and she comes through on the night. So at plus 285, history tells you that Modafferi is going to be live at that sort of betting line. As for where the betting line moves, the current trend has been the money coming in on Araujo, but at minus 345, I'm not sure how wide that gets from there. If this goes to minus 370, minus 400, then in my opinion that'd be absolutely nuts. And I do anticipate money coming in on Modafferi at some point, maybe closer to fight night. But yeah, I do think there's going to be some fluctuation. Ultimately, I don't think they're going to get in the cage too far from where they're at right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, Araujo is a fighter that I like a lot. She starts fast, a real fast starter. She's got good movement, good slick movement, good striking, good combinations, good volume. She's really, really tricky to deal with, and also she's got wrestling and jiu-jitsu in her back pocket as well if she needs it. The problem that I've got with Araujo, and one of the reasons why I think minus 345 is a risk if you're playing her at that wide of a line, is because that movement, that erratic movement, lateral movement, the slick striking, everything about a game does slow down as you're getting into the second round. It's almost like her movement is so good that it's just unable to be consistent throughout a 15-minute fight, and that's exactly what you see with her. You know, if you look at Araujo in round 1 and then fast forward straight to round 3, it looks like a completely different fighter, and that's a real concern here. I think that Modafferi is definitely going to have problems in the early stages in this fight, and maybe even into the second round as well, but Modafferi is really good at striking to close the distance, getting a hold of her opponents and dragging them down to the mat, and she's really heavy on top as well. Now, if she can get Araujo tired into this second round and she's able to get on top of Araujo, then I definitely think that the tide could turn in the fight, and that would be where Modafferi, you would start to see on the live betting lines that line getting shorter and shorter, because Modafferi can take advantage in those sort of scenarios, and we've seen that with Araujo before. She started fast, she started well, but then as she gets tired, she gets taken down off her back. She doesn't have too much going when that gas tank is starting to be depleted a little bit, and like I say, that's where we've seen Modafferi win so many fights in this sort of spot before. It's really key to what happens in that second round. If Araujo can steal that second round in this fight, then whether she's tired or not going into the third round, she should be okay to win in a decision, and I don't think Modafferi's going to stop her, in regards to a finish. And ultimately, that's how I see this fight going down. I think Araujo's going to win round 1. I think round 3 could potentially go to Modafferi, but I think Araujo does enough in the early stages of round 2 at least in order to win that round, and therefore the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Viviane Araujo to win this fight. And in the next fight, I think this fight's been booked a couple of times already. We've got Tyson Nam versus Matt Schnell. Tyson Nam's currently the -135 favourite. The comeback on Schnell at +115 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value is with the underdog in Matt Schnell at +115. I do think the line should probably be flipped, and I think it should be Schnell closer to -135 with Tyson Nam as the underdog, so I do think there's value on the underdog for sure. As for where the betting line moves, the trend has been on Tyson Nam. The money's been coming back on him. I think people like Tyson Nam and the power that he possesses, and he's looked good in his last couple of UFC fights for sure. I do think that betting line will hit a brick wall at some point though. Like if Nam gets to -140, -145, maybe even -150, it's only natural for money to come back in on Schnell at that point, as there will be a lot of value on him. So I do see that happening. I do see fluctuation. Ultimately, come fight night, I do think that the betting lines will have shortened up a bit. But as for how this fight plays out, like I said, Tyson Nam has looked great in his last 2 fights, knocked both of his opponents out, looked phenomenal doing so. We really saw that power that we didn't see earlier in his UFC career in his last 2 fights, and like I said, he's looked great. The thing is with Nam is I feel that he relies too much on that power. I don't think his volume's there. I think his volume's quite low. I would like to see him just throw more strikes, just being active, not looking to knock his opponent out, but throw a jab out there, throw a combination together, just do that more often to increase that volume, because what's going to happen is he's going to get step-ups in competition in the UFC, and those knockouts aren't going to come when you're fighting high-level competition. And the proof of that is his first 2 fights in the UFC. Sergio Pettis, Kai Kara France, he wasn't able to knock those 2 guys out. He took a step down in competition against Adashev and Jerome Rivera. He knocked them both out. So that's just proof that when you are fighting better competition, the chances of finishing that opponent and that competition is significantly decreased. And coming back to the volume, what you're going to find is Tyson Nam's not going to be able to get the knockout, and he's just going to get out-volumed. And I feel that ultimately that's what's going to happen in this Matt Schnell fight. Now, the one thing I will say about Matt Schnell is his chin is a little bit of a question mark. He has been hurt before, he has been finished before, and with how hard Nam lands, and with this being in the lower weight classes, it is definitely possible that Nam lands something on Schnell, knocks him out, or at least hurts him and allows him to follow up and finish the fight. But you do have to ask yourself the question, if that knockout doesn't come, then how does the fight play out? Well, I see Matt Schnell landing more volume. I could honestly see Schnell mixing in the wrestling, looking to work his jiu-jitsu on the mat, and ultimately just being the better all-round fighter, because that's what I think Matt Schnell is. I think if he doesn't get knocked out in this fight, he's going to be up on the numbers, he's going to be mixing his game up, and he's going to look better in the judges' eyes. So if he doesn't get a finish himself, he'll take a decision on the scorecards. And that's what I think happens in this fight. I think the early moments for Schnell is going to be very sketchy. It's going to be very scary, especially if you've got money on Schnell, with Tyson Nam being able to land that one shot and putting him out. But I think the longer this fight goes on, the more comfortable Schnell will feel inside the cage. And once he's more comfortable, he's going to be flowing a little bit more. I think from a speed perspective, I think he's really quick. He puts things together really well. He'll remain active. He'll mix his game up. And those things will help him in this fight. So for me, the bottom line is if Schnell doesn't get knocked out, then he should win this fight relatively comfortably. I don't think he gets knocked out. So for that reason, I'm picking Matt Schnell to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lerone Murphy versus Douglas Silva de Andrade. Lerone Murphy is currently the -275 favourite. The comeback on Douglas at +235 is the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, honestly, if I'm going to pick a value side, it's going to be over at Douglas at plus 235. I definitely understand why Lerone Murphy's favoured in this fight, but I just think that the betting lines are just too wide. As for where the betting lines move, the trend has been money coming in on Douglas. It has only been minimal. It's not moving too crazily, but I do think that that trend will continue, and I think I wouldn't be shocked if Murphy got into this fight roughly at around minus 225, minus 230. I still think the line should be a little bit shorter than that, but I just don't think it moves that much. As for how this fight plays out, Douglas is a really difficult fighter to read because when you look at the fighters he's fought in the UFC, he's only lost 3 times. Zubaira Tukhugov, who in my opinion is a good fighter, and I actually think that he beat Lerone Murphy as well, for what it's worth. Then Rob Font. We all know how I feel about Rob Font. He's a phenomenal fighter, great hands. He beat Douglas. And then you've got Petr Yan, who is the current champion of the division. So when you look at the fighters that have beaten Douglas inside the UFC, there's no shame in losing to those guys. And especially Font and Yan, those guys will beat most fighters in the division anyway. But it's when you look at the wins, this is where it gets a little bit difficult to read where Douglas is at, because his wins are against Renan Barão, who we all know is way past his prime, declining massively. So I can't put too much stock into that. Marlon Vera was a good win, but then Douglas got tested positive after that fight, and I'm not being funny, but he did look like a completely different animal in that fight. He absolutely put it on Vera, but again, that was before Vera made the developments that he's currently sitting on. Then Henry Briones, who's no longer with the UFC, Cody Gibson as well. It's really tough to get a read on Douglas, but he is a little live wire. He likes to move erratically inside the cage. He likes to be aggressive. He likes to come forward. He likes to land in volume, big hard shots to try and knock you out. He will mix in wrestling into his game as well, so he will shoot in for a takedown, try and double leg you, get you down to the mat, try and ground and pound you. He's a really fun fighter to watch. The thing is with Lerone Murphy, although like I said the line should be shorter, I do favour him to win this fight. I think Lerone Murphy has got some really good skills in MMA. For a start, his striking is aggressive, he's crisp, sharp, accurate, and he's also going to be the taller fighter in this fight as well, with a longer reach. So because of that, you've got to assume that it's going to be Douglas that's coming forward, trying to be the aggressor, trying to close the distance, getting inside that boxing range, and that's his style anyway. So I do imagine it's Douglas with that forward pressure, and I just think that if Lerone Murphy just keeps his head, just stays calm, he's going to be able to fire away at Douglas as he's coming in, and it's going to be one of those fights where Douglas might eat 2 or 3 punches to land one himself, and if he doesn't knock Lerone Murphy out with that one punch or with one of those one punches, then Murphy's going to out volume him by 2 or 3 strikes to 1. The longer the fight goes on, if it goes to a decision, that'll be very evident as well. But Murphy also has decent takedown defense, and he's got a good get-up game as well. We saw that in the Tukhugov fight. Tukhugov did take him down a couple of times, but Murphy never made it easy. He never really accepted position for too long on his back, and he was getting back up to his feet. So if Douglas does start mixing things up and does start trying to look for a takedown, I think it'll affect his gas tank, because Murphy won't be taken down easily, so he'll be making him work. Even if Douglas does complete the takedown, he'll have had to have worked for it. And again, stylistically, that favours Murphy as well. If Murphy can tire Douglas out, make Douglas overwork, overexert, and ultimately just pop away at him, remain active, get those numbers up, and if you can't find the finish later in the fight, then you're going to look better on the scorecards. Ultimately, I think that's what's going to happen. I think Douglas is definitely going to have moments in this fight, and that's why I think the line should be shorter. He's definitely going to be aggressive. He's a little fireball, a little live wire inside there, so Murphy's got to keep calm. He's got to not allow himself to get into a slugfest or a brawl, but I don't think Murphy will do that, and I honestly think that although Douglas will look like the fighter that's trying to put the pace on him, it's going to be Murphy that's landing the effective strikes, the bigger action strikes, and just controlling the fight from that perspective. And for those reasons, I'm picking Lerone Murphy to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that's been rebooked due to a COVID-19 related issue. We've got Omari Akhmedov versus Tom Breese. I actually broke this fight down on the last episode of this podcast, but to keep things fresh, I'll break it down again for you. We've got Tom Breese, currently the minus 155 favourite, the comeback on Akhmedov at plus 135 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think that the value's with Tom Breese at minus 155, and I actually did expect Breese to be around minus 165, minus 170, so that's why I do think there is value at -155. As for where the betting line moves, I do think we'll see a little bit more money coming in on Breeze, maybe push him to that -160, -165 range, but at that point, I do think we'll see an influx of bets on Akhmedov because people will just see value in a Dagestani-born Russian that loves wrestling. So I think that there's going to be some fluctuation with the line movement leading into the fight on Wednesday. And ultimately, I think the fighters are going to enter the cage not too far off from where they're at right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, like I said in the last breakdown on the last episode, this fight stylistically, it's a really, really good fight. You've got Tom Breese that's absolutely the better striker. He's going to be the better grappler as well, but he's not the better wrestler, and it's those types of fights that are very interesting to see how it plays out. For me on the feet, Breeze has got really, really good boxing. Sharp, crisp, accurate. He's been training with Anthony Joshua during camp as well, so that can only be a benefit to Tom Breeze, especially if the game plan is to keep this fight on the feet and just light Akhmedov up, which I wouldn't be shocked if that was the game plan. Now, what makes this fight really interesting is Omari Akhmedov is absolutely the better wrestler, so Tom Breeze is the better striker. Akhmedov's the better wrestler. I do anticipate Akhmedov taking Breeze down a couple of times, but the thing is, Akhmedov isn't the better grappler, so sure he'll be able to take Breeze down, but once the fight is on the mat, then I feel Breeze is going to be okay off his back. He's going to be able to try and work some submissions, he's going to be able to try and nullify anything that Akhmedov does topside, and he's going to be able to get back to the feet. And one technique a fighter can use to get back to the feet is by showing the back, using the cage to stand back up, and against a good grappler that's really dangerous because showing your back, you can get your back taken, get put right back down, and that's the problem that Breeze had against Brendan Allen in his last fight. Brendan Allen was just a good grappler, so he couldn't get away with that sort of stuff, but against Akhmedov, Akhmedov isn't the type of grappler that's going to be able to take you back easily and then start working on your back and looking to choke you out. He just doesn't fight in that way, so again, Breeze should be comfortable showing his back, using the cage to get back up to his feet if he's taken down. And the thing is with Akhmedov, he does look in some fights like his cardio has been fixed, and then in other fights it looks like it's broken again, and it's difficult to sort of get a read on if Akhmedov is going to tire out. But something that I have noticed is Akhmedov does tend to tire more in fights where he can't dictate the pace of the fight and when he can't score takedowns easily, when fighters are making him work for the takedowns, or if they're standing back up and making Akhmedov shoot 4 or 5 takedowns per fight. It's those fights where Akhmedov's cardio just doesn't hold out, and I feel that that's going to be something that plays a factor in this fight because Breeze will light Akhmedov up on the feet, in my opinion, with his boxing, with his striking. Getting touched up, not being able to really force anything on your opponent without getting hit is going to be something that will naturally tire you out. And then Akhmedov, if he is getting lit up on the feet, if I am right in saying that, then he's going to be more hungry for a takedown. I don't think Breeze is going to be taken down very easily. That's going to make him work. So even though I do think Akhmedov will score a couple of takedowns in this fight, I think he's going to be made to work for them. I think Breeze is going to be able to stuff some of them as well. And ultimately that is going to have negative effects on the gas tank and the cardio of Akhmedov. So stylistically, I do feel that Breeze is going to look better the longer this fight goes on. So even if Akhmedov does take round 1 in this fight, I feel that it's going to come at a price, and the cost will be some of that gas tank, and the longer the fight goes on, the better Tom Breeze will look. But I'm not convinced Akhmedov does win that first round because all fights start standing, and I think Breeze's boxing and that jab could keep Akhmedov at the range he needs him to be at without having to worry about Akhmedov's wrestling and defending takedowns. And if he can keep him at range in that first round, it really does put Tom Breeze in a good position to try and win this fight. And ultimately, I think Breeze is definitely the better striker here. I think he's the better grappler. Because of that grappling edge, he should be able to handle the wrestling coming back in from Akhmedov, and I think Breeze has got the better cardio if the fight goes down the stretch as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tom Breeze to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ricky Simón against the newcomer Gaetano Pirrello. Ricky Simón is currently the -325 favourite. The comeback on Pirrello at +265 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with Ricky Simón. Honestly, I wouldn't have been shocked if this was -400, -450. Stylistically, it's a good fight for Simón, and also it's a massive step down in competition from some of his previous opponents as well. So I was expecting the betting line to be much higher at -325. 325. I do think there's value. As for where the betting line moves, I do expect it to get close to that minus 400 range. With it currently sitting at minus 325, I don't know if it'll go any higher than minus 400. That might be the worst it goes. But I do think that we will see Ricky Simón money constantly coming in until we get to the fight on Wednesday. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I'll talk about Pirrello first for those that aren't familiar with him. Pirrello looks like a really fun fighter. He's aggressive. He's got a Muay Thai base. You can see that when he fights. He loves to get that Muay Thai plum clinch, fire knees to the head of his opponent, fire elbows in, and he's got power as well. If he lands, he can definitely put you out, and for me, that's where his path to victory is in this fight, because if he doesn't knock Ricky Simón out, then I just don't see him winning this fight. And the main reason for that is I've seen him getting taken down multiple times in his previous fights. I've seen him controlled, seen him settled on bottom, and he's not too much of a threat on bottom. He's not going to try and throw up a triangle or throw up an armbar. In fact, he did throw up one armbar that I saw in one of his previous fights, but he just didn't have the conviction to really attempt it and really finish it, and ultimately it never amounted to anything. And he does look like he settles on his back way too much, tries to stall the fight in the hope that the referee separates them and stands them back up, but that's just not going to work against somebody like Ricky Simón. Even if he did stall to the point where the referee stands them back up, I think Simón's going to be able to level change and take him down again. The thing is with Ricky Simón, even before dealing with how Simón fights as a fighter, you've got to be able to match that pace and that movement and the problems that he causes you. And like I say, that's before you even look into how Simón's going to win the fight. So with Simón being an aggressive, relentless wrestler that probably will be able to take every fighter down that he tries to attempt to take down on, I think that's going to cause someone like Pirrello a lot of problems here. I think we've seen Pirrello taken down by lesser wrestlers. I think we've seen him laid on his back, struggling to get up against lesser grapplers. So if Ricky Simón does have his usual pacey, relentless wrestling type of game plan in this fight, then it should be relatively comfortable for him. The one thing that you've got to be concerned of, and I don't think, for me anyway, I'll never shake this moment out of my mind, and that's seeing a 40-year-old Uriah Faber knock Ricky Simón out. So Pirrello definitely could land that hard shot and knock him out, but if we're being really honest, you could say that about most fighters in most fights. This is mixed martial arts, 4-ounce gloves. The bottom line is, it is a puncher's chance, and for the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Ricky Simón to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mudaeji versus Zarrukh Adashev. Mudaeji's currently the minus 380 favourite. The comeback on Adashev at plus 315 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I don't think there is too much value, if I'm being honest. I can understand why Mudaeji's up at minus 380. It does make sense. And on the flip side, Zarrukh Adashev at plus 315. It is a nice betting line, but ultimately I do think he is in a difficult spot in this fight. And as for where the betting lines move, looking across the board, Mudaeji is minus 400, minus 450 in other spots. I'm not sure how much wider that can get. I do think if there is going to be any line movement, we are going to see the line shortening up a little bit, but I don't think Mudaeji will get better than minus 350 by the time they step in the cage on Wednesday. As for how this fight plays out though, like I said, I think it's a tough spot for Adashev. I actually like him as a fighter. I don't really put too much stock into his short notice debut against Tyson Nam, and I know I have just said it's short notice, but it was very much short notice, almost like it was off the couch. He didn't really look in shape. He was fighting in a different weight class, and ultimately I just don't think he was prepared, and it showed. Obviously he got knocked out very quickly in that fight. His striking just looked a little off to me in regards to the timing, and it did show because Nam beat him to the punch and ultimately finished him. Like I said, I like Adashev as a fighter. He is a little live wire in there. His movement's good. He's got speed. He throws in combinations. He also has takedowns as well, some decent top control. But then you look over at Mudaeji. Mudaeji has also got nice striking. He's also got a lot of speed. I do think he's going to be the fastest striker in this fight, which is really key. And he's got decent grappling himself. He's tough to take down, so if it's not working on the feet for Adashev and he starts looking for takedowns, I don't think he's going to take down Mudaeji very easily. And if he does take him down, Mudaeji will remain active off his back until it's time for him to look to get back up to his feet. Mudaeji is a really complete fighter, and the fact that he absolutely demolished Malcolm Gordon in his last fight speaks volumes, because I actually think Malcolm Gordon is a decent fighter, but Mudaeji went in there and put on an absolute clinic against him, and he put him out really early as well. And honestly, I could see a similar thing happening in this fight as well. Like I said, I've said it a couple of times already, I do like Adashev, but when you look at the X factors in this fight, you've got Mudaeji that's going to have a height advantage. He's going to have a reach advantage. I think he's a better technical striker. I think he's going to be quicker to the punch as well, quicker with the combinations. His straight punches are also going to cause somebody that's a little bit shorter like Adashev a problem, because Adashev is going to have to get into that boxing range to land on him. So if those straight punches with that reach advantage, I think that it's going to keep Adashev at bay, and what's going to happen is Mudaeji is going to be able to push on again like he did against Malcolm Gordon. I think he's going to be able to land stinging shots on Adashev, and ultimately I just think it's going to be a little bit of a stylistic nightmare for Adashev. I don't think it's a good fight for him. I think Mudaeji is going to be the better striker, the more efficient striker, the fighter that's going to be able to keep the fight vertical where his strengths are strongest, and for those reasons I'm picking Mudaeji to win this fight. And in the next fight we've got Dalcha Lungiambula versus Markus Perez. Dalcha is currently the -130 favourite. The comeback on Perez at +110 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think there's marginal value on Dalcha in this spot. There is some red flags which I'll talk about soon, but ultimately at -130, I do think that betting line is really fair. As for where the betting lines move, the current trend is the money on Markus Perez. Dalcha was a bigger favourite just a couple of days ago, but all that money's been coming back in on Perez, and I expect that trend to continue, but just a little bit. Come Wednesday, when they step inside the cage, it wouldn't shock me to see Perez at +100 with Dalcha at -120, maybe -125. But as for how this fight plays out, it could be quite close, and one of the red flags that I was talking about with Dalcha is the fact that this is his third scheduled opponent. He was supposed to fight Carl Roberson, which got rebooked twice in December. Then he got booked to fight Izzy Kefu. That fight didn't materialise, and now he's landed Markus Perez. And the reason that this is a little bit of a red flag is because all this preparation for a fight, multiple opponent changes, it changes the game plans, it changes the mindset, it causes frustration as well. So just mentally, it's a little bit of a red flag, but ultimately when you're looking at the styles of these guys, I do think Markus Perez is the better raw grappler. So if Perez can get a hold of Dalcha, take him down, get on top of him, then I really think that this is Perez's fight to lose. But I think that's easier said than done. Dalcha is athletic, he's explosive, he's powerful, he's strong. So taking him down is not going to be that easy. I know Magomed Ankalaev did that, but for me, he's one of the best fighters in the division and a future champion. So I'd expect that from him, and with him being a Dagestani-born Russian as well. But with Markus Perez, I think it's going to be much harder for him to take Dalcha down. In regards to the striking, from a technical standpoint, again, it's quite close, but the power and the explosivity that Dalcha brings to the cage is on a completely different level than Perez's. I think if he starts being able to get off on his punches, on short combinations and landing hard shots, then he's going to be able to knock Perez out. And I actually think Dalcha could level change himself, take Perez down and grind him out on top. Perez is a good grappler. Off his back though, I don't think he's as efficient as what he would be on top. I do think that Dalcha will definitely have to mind his P's and Q's if he's on top of Perez. Don't make any mistakes, stay safe. Don't allow Perez into the fight or to try and throw up a submission up and submit you. If he minds his P's and Q's, then I think the top control time is another path to victory. So for me, it's all about if Perez can take him down and get on top. And I think out of the paths to victory in this fight, that's probably the least likely to happen. And for that reason, I favour Dalcha Lungiambula in this fight. I think Dalcha's got a striking advantage, a power advantage, an athletic advantage, and I think from an offensive wrestling point of view, Dalcha has the advantage there too. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dalcha Lungiambula to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jerome Rivera versus the newcomer Francisco Figueiredo, who is actually the brother of the UFC flyweight champion Davison Figueiredo. It's Francisco Figueiredo that's the -145 favourite, with the comeback on Rivera at +125 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, after analysing the fight, I honestly feel that this fight should be closer to a pick'em. So I do think that Jerome Rivera at plus money as the underdog is the value side. And as for where the betting lines move, the current trend is the money on Francisco Figueiredo, and maybe there's some of that surname volume getting baked into the line, I'm not too sure. Maybe people are just really confident that he gets it done, but I do think at some point that line is going to get to a point where there's just going to be too much value on Rivera, and you'll start seeing bets coming in on him, closing the line up a little bit. There's going to be a little bit of fluctuation, I think, but come fight night on Wednesday, I do feel that both fighters are going to go into the cage not too far off where they're at right about now. And as for how this fight plays out, Francisco Figueiredo is a well-rounded fighter. He's quite technical with his striking. He'll pick his shots a little bit more opposed to being explosive, coming forward and winging big hard shots. He's got some nice straight punches down the middle, but he's also got decent takedowns when he decides to go to them, and I don't think he goes to them as much as what he should, because when he does shoot a takedown, he generally has a decent completion rate from what I've seen. And in regards to his grappling, when he's on top, he can be a bit of a nightmare as well. He can cause damage to his opponents. On the feet though, I do feel that Jerome Rivera is going to be the better fighter. I think he's got more volume. He has more activity. He's more diverse on the feet, and his kicking game's really good as well. Kicking to the legs, kicking to the body. It keeps his activity up. It also really causes frustration to his opponents, because as they're coming in, he's just trying to stay at range, keeping that distance with his kicks. And like I said, that can cause frustration, and it can cause opponents to start rushing in to try and get past that kicking range and close the distance. And I feel that Francisco Figueiredo might end up getting sucked into that frustration game and trying to really force the closure of that distance. And that to me plays into the game and probably the game plan of Jerome Rivera. Where Francisco Figueiredo is going to have some success in this fight is with takedowns though. If he can get Rivera down to the mat, I don't think Rivera's submission game off his back is dangerous enough to cause Figueiredo any real threat. But I'm not saying a submission couldn't happen, because Rivera, again, is quite elusive. He's quite a diverse fighter. But I just feel that's where Figueiredo is probably going to be best in this fight. If he stays out at kicking range, I don't think that he's going to be able to fire much in for a long period of time and have some success. I think it's going to be Rivera just gradually racking up that volume with his kicks. So for me, Figueiredo's got to close the distance, use his takedowns, get Rivera down on the mat, and get some good control time in topside. If he does that, then he's going to give himself a good chance of winning the fight, especially that control time, because that'll allow him to win the rounds. If he can do that in 2 rounds, as long as he doesn't get finished, he's going to win. But with that said, I'm actually favouring Jerome Rivera in this fight. He's already been in the UFC once, he's already had his debut, so he's going to have that feeling of what it's like, whereas Figueiredo, this is his debut, there could be debut jitters, but that's just one slight factor to it. Even if Figueiredo doesn't have those UFC debut jitters, I just feel like the activity and the volume that Rivera puts out is going to force Figueiredo to do something drastic in this fight, like rushing to close the distance, like thinking he's going to have to score takedowns to give himself a chance to win the fight. And even if he does score takedowns, I'm not sure if the fight is going to be won and lost in the wrestling and grappling departments. I think the greater quality of work in regards to activity, numbers and volume is going to come in the striking department, and that is where I think Jerome Rivera is going to thrive in this fight. So for that reason, I'm picking Jerome Rivera to win this fight. And in the next fight, man, this is a sleeper fight. I'm excited for this fight so much. We've got Mike Davis versus the newcomer, the ex-Cage Warriors champ, Mason Jones. Mike Davis is currently the -185 favourite. The comeback on Jones at +160 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, it's really, really tough, because any plus money on Mason Jones is normally a really solid bet. He's gonna fight for your money. But the thing is, Mike Davis is a really solid fighter himself. So at -185, it's probably on the borderline of being really fair, if I'm being honest. I think if Davis was at -150 or -140, then I think there'd be maybe too much of that hype and that Cage Warriors champ status baked into the line. As for where the betting line moves, I do think we're going to see money coming in on Mason Jones the closer we get to fight night on Wednesday. I think that he is the type of fighter and the type of underdog that you will put trust in that he'll fight for your money. I've already mentioned it once. He will definitely fight for your money. That's 3 times for you. But he opened a bigger underdog, and all that money's been coming back in on Mason Jones, shortening the betting line and pushing him to the +160 where he's sitting at now. I think that trend's going to continue, but I don't think it's going to be drastic between now and Wednesday. It wouldn't shock me to see Mike Davis enter the cage on Wednesday at around minus 175. As for how this fight plays out though, it's such a good fight because both fighters are very similar in the styles. They're both really aggressive on the feet. They've both got power in the hands. They throw in combinations. They've got good cardio. They'll mix in kicks. They've got good wrestling, good topside grappling. And honestly, from a stylistic perspective, this fight is so well matched. It's just I feel that Mike Davis is slightly better in every one of those areas. So I think that Davis is slightly the better boxer. I think he's going to be slightly quicker on the feet. I think he's going to be slightly more aggressive. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he would be able to get back to his feet a little bit quicker if Jones takes him down, opposed to it being the other way around. I just feel that the fight's great. They've both got really great styles. They're both really well-rounded. Just Davis is slightly better in every single area. And unfortunately, even though it's only those slights in every single area, that's the reason the betting line is at minus 185, because all those slight advantages adding up creates a really favourable fight for the fighter that has those slight advantages, in this case Mike Davis. So I love Mason Jones. Mason Jones is going to go on a tear in this division. He's going to win a lot of fights. He's going to get a lot of performance bonuses. His fan base is going to get absolutely huge. I promise you, this kid is an exceptional fighter, but I just feel this is a tiny bit too much too soon for the UFC debut. I'm picking Mike Davis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're finally going to get to see the debut of Khabib's cousin, as we've got Umar Nurmagomedov versus Sergey Morozov. Umar Nurmagomedov is currently minus 500. The comeback on Morozov at plus 400 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I honestly don't think there's too much value, if I'm being honest. I do favour Nurmagomedov to win the fight. I do think he's the better fighter, but at minus 500 it's very close to where there doesn't tend to be too much value in a betting line in mixed martial arts. It's a volatile sport. It's got variance, 4-ounce gloves, anything can happen. So at minus 500, I don't see too much in that in regards to value. As for where the betting line moves, I do think that we're going to see some fluctuation here. It wouldn't shock me to see Umar Nurmagomedov go to minus 550 or minus 600, but I do think for every jump on that betting line, we're going to see some comeback on the other side, just for the fact that it's a really high line. And actually, Morozov is a decent fighter. I do think some of the minus 500 on Nurmagomedov is because of his surname Nurmagomedov and obviously the relation to Khabib. So come fight night on Wednesday, I don't think the betting lines are going to be too far off from where they're at right about now. I think the fluctuation will be there, but I don't think it'll cause too much movement on the money line. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think it's going to be a good fight. It's going to come at a good pace, and I think there's going to be a lot of action. And similar to what I've just mentioned with Mike Davis and Mason Jones, both fighters have a very similar style. They're both good on the feet. I do think the striking styles are a little different. I think Morozov is more explosive, has more power, whereas Umar Nurmagomedov is more methodical, more patient, and ultimately more technical. And as for the wrestling and grappling, both fighters like to shoot in for takedowns. Both look to have good completion rates on the takedowns as well, and the topside grappling, both of them a decent topside. The only knock on that for Morozov is sometimes he can be reversed, he can be swept, his opponents can stand back up, and he can end up putting himself in a bad position after being in a dominant position, which is slightly concerning. And I think that's part of the betting line here, because I have seen on multiple occasions Morozov being on top and then having that good control time, and 2 minutes later he's on his back, he's getting hit, and it's just not a good look, especially when you're fighting somebody that does have solid top control like Umar Nurmagomedov. And like I say, I feel that even though both styles are very similar, Umar Nurmagomedov is just much better in every single area, apart from maybe power. That is something Morozov has. He can sting and hurt his opponents, so that is something that Umar Nurmagomedov is definitely going to have to be careful of in this fight. If he doesn't get hit really hard, if he doesn't get stung by a quick combination from Morozov, then it should be relatively easy work on the night for Nurmagomedov. The bottom line is here, I think the striking could be quite close, but I think the wrestling and the topside grappling of Umar Nurmagomedov is going to be key in this fight. I think if Morozov takes Nurmagomedov down, Nurmagomedov will either be able to get back up to his feet, or he'll be able to sweep and reverse the position and then just go to work himself on top. Whereas if Morozov is taken down by Nurmagomedov, I think Nurmagomedov will absolutely smash him on the mat, and I'm not sure Morozov will be able to get back up to his feet very easily, if at all, and I do think he's going to have problems on bottom. I think that's exactly what's going to happen in this fight. I think Nurmagomedov's going to take him down. If he doesn't finish him, he'll finish the round on top and then go again in the second round until he either gets a finish or a decision on the scorecards. I'm picking Umar Nurmagomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got two UFC newcomers. We've got Victoria Leonardo versus Manon Fiorot. Manon Fiorot currently the -170 favourite. The comeback on Victoria Leonardo at +150 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think there's some value on Manon Fiorot. It wouldn't have shocked me to see her at -200, maybe -210. So at -170, I do think there's some value there. As for where the betting lines move, actually, it was Fiorot that opened the underdog in this fight, which is quite surprising. All the money's come in on her, pushed her all the way up closer to a -200 favourite. I really don't know what the bookies have been doing lately with some of these betting lines, but it is what it is. I do think the trend of where the money is coming at the minute in regards to being on Fiorot will continue, but I do think it'll subside just a little bit. I think we might see Fiorot enter the cage on Wednesday at -180, maybe -185. But as for how the fight plays out, Fiorot is a really good fighter. She's aggressive on the feet, she's got volume, she's got power, she'll move forward on every opportunity. When she's in the clinch, she'll work with short, sharp shots, elbows, knees. She'll look to take her opponents down, and when she gets on top, she's got good ground and pound, good control. She'll look for submissions. She's actually quite a complete fighter, and I think she's going to do well in the UFC. For Victoria Leonardo, I think she's going to be outmatched on the feet in regards to the striking, the aggression and the volume. But if she can get Fiorot down, put Fiorot on her back and start working on top of her, that's Victoria Leonardo's path to victory. That's where she is strong. That's where she has her strengths. So for me, it's all a matter of if Victoria Leonardo can get Fiorot on the mat and really grind, really go to work and get the top control time herself. And I think it's possible, but I don't know if she can do it consistently over 15 minutes for 3 rounds, unless she can get Fiorot out of there. But I've got a funny feeling Fiorot isn't going to be going anywhere very easily. So I think it's a difficult matchup for Victoria Leonardo in this fight. I think that Fiorot is going to have huge advantages on the feet. She's going to be the aggressor. She's going to be forcing Leonardo back. That's going to make the takedowns harder to secure for Leonardo. And actually, it really wouldn't surprise me if Fiorot was the one getting takedowns and getting some good control time and some good ground and pound and doing good work on top herself. I think Fiorot's got the striking advantages. I do think that the grappling is going to be close, but if Fiorot can get on top, which I believe she can because I think her wrestling's slightly better, then I do give her the advantage on the mat as well. For those reasons, I'm picking Manon Fiorot to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again guys, I'd appreciate all the likes to the video and subscriptions to our MMAPlay365 YouTube channel too. And remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and as a long-term winning gambler over the last 4 years, that'll come good for you. And we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, we have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop onto MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.